Make up mine. Fight.
I really like browsing random Wikipedia articles. As someone who considers myself a connoisseur of filling my very limited brain space with equally useless information, sometimes just going on a wild Wikipedia adventure and seeing where the site takes me at like 4 AM is really relaxing and fun. That said, sometimes I'm surprised by just how specific certain Wikipedia pages are. Some things you really wouldn't think were culturally relevant or important enough to receive dedicated articles on the biggest information repository available to us online. In that respect, I recently discovered one category on Wikipedia that I think is really interesting: video game levels with their own dedicated articles. I want to stress, these are not articles on fanon wikis or more specialized information hubs. These are articles on the big old white logo Wikipedia-ass Wikipedia, and honestly, I think that's really cool, that the people who run and moderate this site feel that these silly little virtual playgrounds are important and culturally relevant enough to be featured on the same encyclopedia as real-world historical figures and animal biographies. That said, the choices and again, very specific nature of some of these articles is really puzzling to say the least. Some levels are no-brainers to be featured, whereas others are a little bit more head-scratching. So in this video, I want to give a brief overview of every video game level with its own Wikipedia page, see if we can find any trends in what they chose to feature, and maybe encourage some of y'all to contribute your own ideas. Let's roll. So before we start off proper, I want to real quick discuss the things from this list that we will not be giving full segments in this video. The category itself has a few technicalities that I feel would be better discussed in a separate video, or just quickly expounded on first here. First up is multiplayer maps. I feel as though multiplayer maps or stages like TF2's 2 Fort, CSGO's Dust 2, or Mario Kart's Baby Park would make a bit more sense to have their own dedicated video, rather than lumping them in with this video's otherwise solely single player focus. We also won't be discussing levels released as either an episodic standalone expansion or an entire standalone DLC. This is because I feel as though their standalone release makes their individual Wikipedia pages make more sense, and I want to focus on the weird specific nature of these articles in this video. Luckily, this subcategory only covers Half-Life Lost Coast and the Hokkaido and Sapienza levels of Hitman 2016 for our purposes. Lastly, we won't be discussing locations within games that are more the overarching setting or world of their entire game and less levels. There are a few of these within the Wikipedia category, and I feel as though it would be disingenuous to include what are effectively the entire settings of certain games alongside individual levels found within them. If you're at all curious, here's every one of those that the Wikipedia article includes. The Black Mesa Research Facility from Half-Life, the Citadel and Normandy from Mass Effect, Dracula's Castle from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Midgar from Final Fantasy VII, the Raccoon City Police Station and Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil, the Ishimura from Dead Space, and Yharnam from Bloodborne. Again, if you've played any of these games, then you'll be well aware that these quote-unquote levels are in fact the entire settings of their games, or at the very least significant chunks of them, and that comparing them to things like Green Hill Zone or World 1-1 would be kind of disingenuous. Either way, that leaves us roughly 21 levels to discuss. All these technicalities out of the way, let's dive in. Starting us off is the first of two Call of Duty campaign levels for this list, being All Gillied Up from Call of Duty Modern Warfare. This is a stealth level and a flashback to 15 years before the rest of the game, set in the Chernobyl radiation-racked wasteland of Pripyat, Ukraine. The level sees the player and his companion, John Price and Captain Macmillan, attempting to assassinate the leader of the ultra-nationalist group that serves the antagonist of the Modern Warfare series. The level is extra noteworthy for its freedom of choice and, at the time, incredibly intelligent AI, with the player being capable of engaging enemies directly, aggressively, or not at all, and the enemies responding in turn. The level is frequently cited as an exceptionally tense, stressful, and even scary mission due to the high stakes of being discovered by the enemies. The developer of this level, Call of Duty veteran Mohammed Alavi, developed its AI in secret due to its extreme difficulty and the complexity of its code, and reportedly spent over 3 months writing over 10,000 lines of code for just the first minute of gameplay. Funnily enough, he went on to call the code garbage, but said it did what he needed it to do. Luckily, Eventually, all of this hard work paid off, as All Gillied Up would go on to be one of Call of Duty's most noteworthy and revered levels in its entire history. Its Wikipedia page basically has 3 different sections for its reception, split between initial reception, retrospective commentary, and legacy, even though those last 2 are usually the same thing as far as Wikipedia is concerned, and all of them are filled with unanimous praise for the level. It was regarded as the best level in Modern Warfare, a work of brilliance, breathtaking, and a thoughtful exploration of the theme of violence in video games. It's regarded as one of the best levels in Call of Duty and one of the best stealth levels in video game history, and all in all, I'd say it deserves its Wikipedia page. I sure do hope that this positivity for Call of Duty keeps up throughout this video. If you know, you know. Next up is a level I'm much more personally familiar with, being Honor Londo from Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I can absolutely attest to the visual, atmospheric, and gameplay brilliance of Honor Londo. This is a level set at the exact midpoint of DS1, being the immediate follow-up to the derelict and notoriously difficult and unfair Sen's Fortress. It's known as the Seat of the Gods, the home of Dark Souls' most powerful deities, and was intended to be a reward to the player for clearing Sen's Fortress. Once the player is whisked away here, they'll immediately be struck by its gorgeous golden sheen and visual splendor, especially compared to the dank, decrepit hellscapes that compose pretty much the entire game before and after it. Dark Souls designer Hidetaka Miyazaki actually visited the real-world Milan Cathedral to get inspiration for Honor Londo. That said, Honor Londo is just as noteworthy for its incredibly high difficulty and deliberately unclear design, with the level being loaded with ball-bustingly strong enemies, gotcha moments, and intentionally cryptic progression paths, like needing to walk across what seems like a background prop at one point to progress. It's also extremely multi-layered, hiding a ton of secrets and very important insights into Dark Souls lore and world. Gameplay-wise, it's particularly noteworthy for the infamous Honor Londo archers, arguably the most hated ordinary set of enemies in the series, and its bosses, Ornstein and Smo, who are infamous for acting as an insane progression barrier and massive difficulty spike, specifically to keep unprepared or less skilled players out of the rest of the game. Going along with Honor Londo's larger-than-life nature and visual brilliance, it's often cited as the best individual section of Dark Souls 1 and one of the best levels in video game history. It's been compared to Dante's Divine Comedy, a dazzling, heavenly, and even pornographic, yes seriously, experience, and a level that's impressive yet intimidating nature gets down to the core appeal of Dark Souls. It's also been called the 8th wonder of the virtual world, which makes me wonder what the other 7 are. It is worth noting though that there's one particular PC gamer journalist who really hated the Honor Londo archers, saying that they were the moment he stopped loving the game and its first truly unfair section. Regardless, Honor Londo is a level that's as visually brilliant as it is brilliant in design. It's easily my personal favorite level in the entire Dark Souls series, and one that I feel, again, deserves its Wikipedia page thanks to its icon status and aesthetic beauty. Also, Ornstein and Smo used to have their own Wikipedia page, but it's gone now. Rip to 2 real ones. Onto a significantly less fun section of the video, we have the quest Family Matters from The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, more commonly known as the Bloody Baron. This is an infamous quest within The Witcher 3, lauded for its heavy subject matter and appropriately intelligent writing with extremely difficult choices. Without going into a full spoiler-heavy quest breakdown, the Bloody Baron sees the player character Geralt attempting to locate his missing daughter Ciri through an alliance with well-known warlord, the Bloody Baron. The Baron offers to help Geralt find his daughter in exchange for Geralt doing the same for him, helping him find his own missing wife and daughter. However, things quickly unravel as the Baron's true nature and history are revealed, and the story quickly spirals into a tale of alcoholism, abuse, undead babies, witches, orphans, and all around a few very sad endings. Family Matters was extremely positively received, with particular praise going towards its thematic maturity and writing nuance. It's hard to get into the weeds of it without going into spoilers, which is something I'd really rather not do for this quest, but rest assured that it is one that raises a lot of meaningful questions and puts the player in a situation where there really are no perfect endings. It was described as heartbreaking, an effective emotional punch, and the peak of The Witcher 3's dramatic storytelling. I personally haven't played much of The Witcher 3, I put like maybe 3 hours into the Switch version many years ago, but reading about this quest definitely makes me more interested in earnestly revisiting it. Next up is one of very few things on this list that's notable for its negative reception, the fabled cat hair mustache puzzle from the 1999 point-and-click adventure game Gabriel Knight 3. The cat hair mustache puzzle sees the player character Gabriel needing to obtain a fake mustache in disguise in order to steal the scheduled motorcycle rental of another man named Mosley, who in fact does not have a mustache. To this end, the player will need to complete a laundry list of increasingly nonsensical tasks, from using a spritzer, adhesive tape, and maple syrup to construct a fake mustache out of cat hair, to using a magic marker to modify Mosley's stolen ID to add a mustache, to finally obtaining a red hat from a lost and found to hide Gabriel's lack of baldness. This is all compounded by Gabriel Knight 3's innovative yet very disorienting 3D camera and movement system, and the lack of visual clarity present in what they're actually doing at a lot of points of the quest. The puzzle was only included in the game due to necessity and time constraints, being designed by a producer rather than a designer due to another proper puzzle having to be cut. It was disliked internally by the team, a sentiment that was shared by the general gaming press of the day. It's kind of seen as the final boss of 90s adventure PC game Moon Logic puzzles, with most critics viewing it as excessive and arbitrary even by the genre's usual standards. It was called obtuse, nonsensical, and something that the vast majority of players would not be able to figure out without a guide or walkthrough. Its relatively early placement in the game led many people to never experience most of the rest of it, and it's even been cited as one of the contributing factors to the death of 80s and 90s adventure games. And when you consider that Gabriel Knight 3 was Sierra's last game before the collapse of the genre, listen, all I'm saying is that it lines up. All things considered, the cat hair mustache puzzle was the last thing the adventure game genre needed by the late 90s, and the type of puzzle that was emblematic of the gaming public's changing tastes at the time. He didn't even have a fucking mustache. So here's one we probably all know about, the fabled Diablo 2 cow level. For the two of you in the audience who aren't familiar, the cow level is an Easter egg hidden in the post-game of Diablo 2 that's accessed by completing a very arbitrary checklist of in-game tasks with specific items after beating the final boss. Once done, the player is given a one-time pass to the elusive Moo Moo Farm, or cow level, an alternate dimension where the player is assaulted by waves of bipedal cows known as Hell Bovine, and their leader, the Cow King. Once completed, the player is gifted a few exclusive items and then locked out of the cow level on that save file. The cow level was actually inspired by a player-born rumor and hoax in Diablo 1 and its Hellfire expansion that Blizzard decided to actually realize in Diablo 2 due to its popularity with players. References or elements similar to the cow level would go on to appear in nearly every Blizzard game afterwards. The cow level is one of the most iconic Easter eggs in video game history, with Blizzard's famous mantra of "there is no cow level" entering the greater pantheon of oft-quoted video game memes. Not only would a cow level adjacent Easter egg be included multiple times in pretty much every future Blizzard game, but it's also been referenced a lot in several non-Blizzard games and even real-world papers about cattle. The cow level is an interesting addition to this list because it also doubles as both an Easter egg and a hoax, and really is a shining example of how cool Blizzard and gaming as a whole used to be. Definitely not anymore though. Next up is Effect and Cause, a widely revered level from perennial Respawn reject Titanfall 2. Effect and Cause is very widely considered to be not only the best level in Titanfall 2, but also one of the best FPS levels of all time. Designed by Jake Keating after watching the speculative series Life After People, which explores a hypothetical future where humans suddenly vanish, Effect and Cause is a level that features one key gimmick: real-time time travel. By designing the level in such a way that two maps, a derelict present and a pristine functional past, are aligned perfectly with each other, Effect and Cause allows players to dynamically and losslessly shift between time periods with different environmental designs, enemies, and aesthetics. This leads to an exhilarating play experience that's entirely unique not only to the FPS genre, but most of gaming as a whole. This level was reportedly hell to work on, with its mechanical and artistic complexity leading to a ton of mid-development reworks and a lot of playtesting headache. The idea was originally intended for Titanfall 1, but was left on the cutting room floor for the sequel due to its development scope being too massive for the first game. Luckily, all of this headache and uncertainty paid off, as Effect and Cause was ultimately lauded as a seamless, unique, and exhilarating gameplay experience. It was described as bold, brilliant, and flawlessly executed, with a lot of critics saying it was one of the best FPS levels they'd ever played. Also worth noting is that the game's art director, Todd Hsu, described Keating's pitch as a quote artistic atrocity before conceding that Keating was still a very talented game designer. Effect and Cause really is a prime example of how a thorough commitment to your vision and an understanding understanding of the gaming medium can lead to amazing unique levels. I sure am glad that this series died for Apex Legends. It took an astonishingly long time to reach a retro platformer level for this video, but what better place to start there than Green Hill Zone. This is going to be a comparatively shorter section of this video, as I really don't think anyone needs much of an explanation as to why Green Hill Zone has its own Wikipedia page. It's the Sonic level, arguably the Genesis level, or even the Sega level. The one they keep remixing, revisiting, and remaking to some extent in nearly every Sonic game. It's the one that's referenced in comics, in movies, in goddamn Lego. It's Green Hill Zone. No other singular level has permanently defined an entire franchise's existence in the way that Green Hill Zone has for Sonic. When people think about what this character should be doing, their mind immediately goes to blast processing through those green hills. To a lot of people, this was their first video game level, and between its beautiful colors and equally beautiful music, it's hard not to get caught up in the 90s crack-laced Sega nostalgia trip that is Green Hill Zone. No matter what form it takes, you can always expect a phenomenal first level when it pops up. Our next level is the haunting and ominously predictive level of Liberty Island, the opening mission of 2000's Deus Ex. Set in a disillusioned 2052 America, Deus Ex is a game all about government conspiracy, societal inequality, deadly viruses, the rise of terrorism, and other things that I don't want to talk about in a silly YouTube video. Regardless, Liberty Island is Deus Ex's opening level, and sees the player character JC Denton acting on behalf of UNATCO, an anti-terrorist coalition, to clean up a group of insurgents that have taken control of UNATCO's headquarters in the real-world Liberty Island of New York City. To this end, the player is given, at the time, unprecedented free reign over their choices and paths, with their means of completing the mission and even their enemies' ultimate fates being left up to their own discretion. Liberty Island was based on the game designer's, Warren Spector's, childhood in NYC. While the other team members were less enthused specifically about the New York setting, they were, at the very least, very excited about setting the level in a wide-open urban playground. Despite being the first level of the game, Liberty Island was actually the last one finished from a developmental standpoint, and the team viewed its success as a high-risk gamble that would ultimately decide the fate of the entire game. Despite internal disagreements about how much freedom the player should be given, the team ultimately decided on an open-ended level setup that would allow the player any means of completing the level that they wish between fighting, sneaking, and hacking. Liberty Island was very well received, and is often considered striking for its haunting visuals and concept, its at the time unheard of levels of player choice and freedom, and its trial by fire design that puts the game's caustic storytelling and difficult choices on display from minute one. It was considered one of the best and most technically impressive opening levels in PC gaming history at the time, and its focus on player choice was praised extensively. It's also worth noting that this level, which was in a game released in June of 2000, featured things like a missing Twin Towers and a focus on the rise of terrorism and social inequality in the US, which is, yeah, let's just move on. And on a completely unrelated note, we have the Milkman Conspiracy from Psychonauts. Psychonauts is a game all about exploring the inner psyches of different wacky characters, and among them, this one is the most noteworthy. Set in a twisty-turny, abstract distortion of a stereotypical 1950s neighborhood, the Milkman Conspiracy sees the player navigating the mind of Boyd Cooper, a chronically paranoid conspiracy theorist and guard of an asylum who constantly refers to an enigmatic figure known as the Milkman. Within his mind palace, the player will find a unique mixture of distorted suburbia imagery, men in black trying in vain to appear inconspicuous, mysterious children and their quote-unquote dead mother, and finally the Milkman himself, who never stops repeating the iconic phrase,
"I am the milkman. My milk is delicious. I am the milkman. My milk is delicious. I am the milkman. My milk is delicious."
The level features a unique Mario Galaxy-esque gravity mechanic and has a focus on using items to solve puzzles. The whole thing paints a picture of a deeply troubled and fractured mind, torn apart by delusions of danger and conspiracies. The level was inspired by game director Tim Schafer's fascination with conspiracy theorists as people, a Double Fine worker making up the "I am the milkman" phrase, and his desire to make a level exploring mental illness without punching down on people suffering from it. The level and the character of Boyd Cooper were also heavily based on a real-world homeless man who worked on and off at the Double Fine offices, who often expressed belief in conspiracies. The Milkman Conspiracy was tremendously well received and is pretty often considered the best level in Psychonauts. Most critics praised its uncanny nature, its equally funny and off-putting sense of humor, its unique gravity-oriented platforming, and its uniqueness within video games, with some calling it one of the best platformer levels ever made. It is fittingly often the subject of theories wondering just what the level means and is trying to say, with the character of Boyd Cooper often being considered one of the game's most empathetic but also distorted characters. He's a man who's lost himself in the fear, uncertainty, and distrust of conspiracy theories, something that can realistically happen to anyone who stumbles across the wrong rabbit hole and believes what they're told. But above all, he is the Milkman, and his milk is delicious. Following up on that, we have the infamous Minus World, or World -1 from the original Super Mario Bros. This is, in fact, not an intended level within the game, and is actually a glitch encountered by executing a very specific clip into a warp in World 1-2. When successfully performed, the player will find themselves in the elusive Minus World, an infinitely looping underwater level that repeats a portion of the game's much later World 7-2. In the Japanese Famicom Disk System release, the glitch still exists, but instead sends players to a unique sequence of 3 levels which end the game upon completion. Shigeru Miyamoto has denied that the Minus World was an intentional inclusion, but considers it a feature and not a bug either way due to the fact that it doesn't crash the game. The Minus World is right up there with Missing No in terms of famous video game glitches, and is sometimes cited as being an early progenitor of the concept of secret levels in games. Its combination of mystique, consistency, easiness to replicate, and a dedicated spotlight in Nintendo power have led it to becoming mythologized within the general gaming sphere, and I remember seeing references to it for as far back as I can remember consuming gaming media. All in all, while it certainly wasn't intentional, the Minus World is still one of Mario's earliest iconic levels. Okay, I just want to give a big old trigger warning before this next section, a proper verbal one this time. Our next level on the list is No Russian from Call of Duty Modern Warfare. It did have a page on Wikipedia and is included in the Wikipedia category, so I had to talk about it in this video, but I do my best not to sensationalize things or make light or jokes about the subject of the level. I wanted to be extra careful. I did give people the option and heads up if they wanted to skip this one. You can skip it by going to this timestamp here. Either way, I hope you all enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, we gotta talk about this one. Speaking seriously, I am not at all well versed enough in the societal or cultural aspects of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2's infamous No Russian mission to make any declarative statements about it, its artistic integrity, its societal merit, or its censorship and lack thereof in certain regions. I am not trying to fence it, I'm just trying to avoid speaking on things that I am not qualified to. To that end, I'll keep this section brief and do my best not to sensationalize things. No Russian is a mission in 2007's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 that sees the player character controlling an undercover CIA agent as he's roped into a mass shooting attack perpetrated by Russian terrorists in a Russian airport. The attacker's goal is to frame the US for the attack using American weaponry and instructing each other to speak no Russian. The player is then able to either watch in horror at or directly participate in the slaughter of dozens of innocent civilians in the airport before a proper battle against authorities breaks out. The player never has to fire their weapons at civilians in no Russian, and can in fact skip the mission altogether with no consequence. The level was designed primarily to put the player in the front row seat of an atrocity and justify the game's plot, and was never intended to glorify or fetishize terrorism or acts of violence. It was intended from minute one to be a horrific, traumatizing, and harrowing part of the game, and not a tasteless mass shooting simulator. Despite this, the level was a watershed moment in the history of video game controversy and censorship, with many both mainstream and gaming news outlets decrying the level as tasteless, overly graphic, and shocking, and that it generally failed in its ambition to realistically and earnestly depict a crime on this scale. The level was heavily censored in some versions of the game, with the player instantly failing should they fire on any civilians in the Japanese version, and was entirely removed from the Russian version of the game. Again, I don't want to make any definitive statements on this level, as I am not qualified to. Regardless, No Russian is, for better or worse, arguably the most iconic and infamous Call of Duty level of all time, and one of the most infamous video game levels in the history of the media. Moving on to less controversial ground, we have the Ocean House Hotel from 2004's Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. This is one of a few scary levels on the list that we'll be discussing, levels in otherwise non-horror games that are notable for their frightening design. The House Hotel specifically sees the player character, a resurrected vampire, navigating a burnt-out hotel that's haunted by the ghosts of a woman and her 2 children. Rather than using intimidating enemy encounters or jump scares, the level instead focuses on slow, creeping dread and sound design to instill fear into the player. The level's designer, Brian Mitsoda, treated it as though he was designing a theme park ride, and based the scares within the level on several real-life haunted house attractions and dark rides. He specifically cited Alien and Jaws as pieces of media that inspired it, believing that a monster you can't see is scarier than one that you can. The Ocean House Hotel was very well received by the gaming press of the time, with it even winning GameSpy's Best PC Level of the Year award for 2004, and being described as an inspired moment within the game. Several critics noted it as Bloodline's standout section, praising its ability to exist as a convincingly scary level in a game otherwise occupied by supernatural creatures, its effective and seamless use of classic haunted house design archetypes, its slow burn, dreadful atmosphere, and its lack of loading screens, which allowed it to keep up its harrowing feeling for its entire run. Again, there will be a few sections in this video like this one, so I don't want to dwell on the Ocean House Hotel for too long, but all in all, it is a standout level. Onto a markedly not scary level, we have the famous Opera House section from Final Fantasy VI. You're just gonna have to hear me out on this one, as this section pretty famously relies on the vibes and feels experienced by playing the game naturally, and is pretty hard to explain otherwise. Regardless, the Opera House section sees the player's party attempting to get in the good graces of Setzer, a gambler with the only functional airship in the game's world, which they need. The group knows that Setzer is planning to kidnap the singer at a local opera performance, and realizing that their own party member, Celeste, bears a striking resemblance to her, they switch the two out with the intent of having Celeste allow them on board Setzer's airship. From here, the player is able to witness one of the first truly cinematic sections in video game history, as Celeste performs her opera on stage. Singing through 16-bit MIDI compositions, Celeste performs a tune that's equal parts cheesy and beautiful. The song is then interrupted by the villain Ultros, who the party swiftly defeats before getting on Setzer's airship, which the attending crowd thinks was all a part of the act and starts cheering. This extended sequence has been cited as one of the earliest examples of the video games as art concept, with the game's composer Yoshinori Kitase writing the song as a love letter for his soon-to-be wife after not having watched a single opera performance. The scene has gone on to be one of the most memorable and revered sections of the entire Final Fantasy series, with some critics applauding its ability to go from awkward and cheesy to genuinely beautiful and heartfelt as you experience it. You start out laughing at the attempt by this silly 16-bit game to convincingly sell an opera performance before realizing that you're actually feeling something. Basically, it's this.
If you're yucking it up, you're laughing, your sides are hurting, all of a sudden you realize you're feeling something too. When did that happen?
It's been called a standout video game moment, and one that those who experience it firsthand will remember with clarity. It was also referenced in Undertale. Next up is a strong contender for my personal favorite level on this list, as well as possibly my favorite level in any video game ever, Ravenholm from Half-Life 2. This is another scary level, sending the player character of Gordon Freeman through a once sanctuary-like mining town that's since been turned into a nightmarish hellscape of humans turned zombies. Ravenholm once existed as a secluded refuge from the control of the Combine, Half-Life 2's main villainous faction. However, it was bombarded with headcrab shells upon its discovery, zombifying most of its inhabitants and killing the rest. Bear in mind that Half-Life zombie victims are still conscious and can be heard screaming and begging for help as you fight them. Regardless, Ravenholm is placed directly after the player receives the gravity gun and acts as a harrowing playground for their new tool. Assisted by the town's sole survivor, the insane yet very helpful Father Grigori, the player will have to battle through waves of screaming, crying, flaming zombies as they desperately search for an escape, leading to a climactic final standoff in the town's graveyard that sees the player escaping and Father Grigori staying behind to cover them. The level is devoid of any other life or enemies, existing solely as a secluded, cut off, and horrific example of what the Combine is capable of, and just why the player and Gordon have to stop them. Again, Ravenholm is quite possibly my favorite level in any video game. While I'm not as big on Half-Life as the rest, it's hard to deny the harrowing brilliance of this zombie-infested hellzone. From the sound design that features the distant cries of zombies and victims, to the dark, oppressive, rundown atmosphere, to the environmental details cluing you into just how horrific of a tragedy Ravenholm's attack was, to the effective surprise introduction of new zombie types such as fast zombies and the horrifying poison zombies. Ravenholm was Valve firing on all cylinders, putting their uniquely twisted sensibilities on full display to deliver a truly unforgettable gameplay and story experience. Ravenholm was such a standout level that it was considered to be the setting of an entire spin-off by Arcane Studios. No other level on this list can say that. Also, yeah, game critics liked it at the time. Were you surprised? And for our last scary level on the list, we have Thief Deadly Shadows' infamous Robbing the Cradle, known in-game as the Shalebridge Cradle. This is a level I actually played for the first time quite recently, and am very eager to talk about, because it's basically the only thing people know about this game. Robbing the Cradle sees Thief protagonist Garrett attempting to gain information about a mysterious killer known as the Grey Lady from within the abandoned and very haunted Shalebridge Cradle, a former insane asylum / orphanage. Great combo. The opening section of this level, the Outer Cradle, features no enemies or threats, yet uses distortions of the game's typical danger sound cues, such as distant speech, footsteps, whispers, and breaths, to instill fear and uneasiness into the player. The level's soundscape as a whole is absolutely terrifying, and has been described as a, quote, drunken miasma of sound by its designers. Once within the Inner Cradle, the player will see the true extent of Shalebridge Cradle's danger and depraved history, which I will not tell you about, because you should play the game yourself. Designed by project director Randy Smith and Jordan Thomas, the Shalebridge Cradle was created with the express written intent of being the scariest level ever featured in a video game. Randy Smith developed his own working horror theory as to the inner workings of fear, and the team studied and visited several real-life supposedly haunted locations, in addition to studying horror media when designing the level. The level featured a focus on emergent and unplanned events, such as environmental details aligning with random enemy movement, and forcing the player into uncomfortable or dangerous scenarios to inform its horror. All said and done, the Shalebridge Cradle would go on to easily be the most memorable and recognizable part of Thief Deadly Shadows, with some critics claiming that the level's sole existence made the game a horror game. Deadly Shadows was included on multiple scariest games of all time lists simply due to the Shalebridge Cradle, despite not being designed as a horror game otherwise, and it's been called one of the most brilliant and frightening levels ever included in a game. Personally, I thought it was slightly below this exceptionally high expectation when I played it, but even I can't deny how effective its design is, and I can absolutely understand its reputation. Revisiting a game from earlier in the list, we now have the Serpent Rogue puzzle from Gabriel Knight 3. Unlike the derided puzzle from earlier, the Serpent Rogue is often regarded as one of the best and most creative puzzles in adventure game history, and the definitive standout of the series it's a part of. The puzzle sees the player character, Grace Nakamura, attempting to decipher riddles and clues found within a gamified version of the real-world Serpent Rogue puzzle. The real-world poem is supposedly linked to the treasure of the Rennes Chateau village, which has had its existence disputed for years. It's basically the French equivalent to the Bermuda Triangle or Loch Ness Monster, only as a buried treasure. The puzzle sees the player using clues granted by a fictionalized version of the poem to actually find the Rennes Chateau treasure, accomplished through a lengthy and arduous yet rewarding and intriguing series of tasks. The puzzle was difficult for the game's designer, Jane Jensen, to implement, as she basically had to craft a fictionalized solution to a real-world mystery. She had to heavily modify certain sections of the poem so that it would work as a functional puzzle solution in-game. So no, the Serpent Rogue will not lead you to bury treasure in real life. Regardless, reception to the Certain Rogue was extremely positive, with most critics lauding it as one of the best overarching puzzles ever included in a game. It's been cited as one of many people's personal favorites, and went on to inspire both individual puzzles and entire games later down the line. At one point, one author even publicly discredited another for not liking the puzzle. Personally, I'm not an adventure game guy, but even I can understand what made this puzzle so creative. Oh, hell yeah, it's the Halo Beach. Next, we're talking about the Silent Cartographer from Halo Combat Evolved, also known as that beach level that everyone loves. Taking place as the 4th level of the game, the Silent Cartographer sees the player character Master Chief battling both on foot and in vehicles to reach an ancient Forerunner installation starting on a beach, featuring a level of freedom then never seen in an FPS game, an unparalleled level of momentum as the level ramps up, a beautiful beachside aesthetic, and an all-around exhilarating non-stop action atmosphere this level is a clear standout within not only Halo 1, but also the entire series. The Silent Cartographer was being developed while Halo was still an RTS game, and it was actually this level's gameplay and the fun factor of battling through a beach on a warthog that convinced the dev team to shift gears. This level is why Halo is an FPS game. Visually, it was based on the Pacific Northwest beaches that Bungie experienced upon being moved to Seattle by Microsoft, and was designed to be an open-ended experience that lent itself to exploration and player choice. Fittingly, the Silent Cartographer was revered not only as the best level of Halo 1, but arguably the entire series, with critics and fans praising its heart-pumping and exhilarating pacing, its aesthetic beauty, its unparalleled open-endedness for the time, and its, quote, mind-bogglingly non-linear brilliance. Many reviewers praised the level's interconnectedness and real feeling, and it was all around the level that sold a lot of people on Halo. I know that some retro FPS fans hate Halo 1 for casualizing or consoleizing the FPS genre, but it's hard to hate a level like the Silent Cartographer. As for our most recent level on this list, we have Stormveil Castle from 2022's Elden Ring. This towering structure shows up relatively early in the game and acts as Elden Ring's first proper legacy dungeon. Individual locations in Elden Ring that act as more small-scale dungeon crawls that harken back to previous Souls games and less like the game's typical open-world expanses. To this end, Stormveil Castle acts as a sort of hands-off tutorial, focusing on teaching the player the game's individual nuances through trial by fire in a difficult location. Elden Ring does have a proper mechanical and button tutorial, but Stormveil is where its true design sensibilities and expectations for the player are laid bare. It houses a ton of secrets, including the path to the player's first potential encounter with fan-favorite character Ranni the Witch, and features multiple optional and mandatory boss fights. Stormveil Castle was very well received by both players and critics, with it being viewed as both an effective tutorial and a seamless integration of the Souls series' typical design philosophies into an open-world game. It was praised for its interconnected design, its excruciating but never unfair difficulty, its wealth of secrets, and its exploration-encouraging layout. Some critics felt that Stormveil Castle even justified Elden Ring's open world through its existence, and that later dungeons in the game didn't live up to its lofty standards. The Escapist was less impressed, but who's really surprised? Also worth noting, some critics really hated the Warhawk enemies that show up throughout this level, which kind of feel like the 2020s version of the Honor Londo archers. While it's not my favorite from Soft Castle, I can absolutely speak to the brilliance of Stormveil. Okay, we're in the home stretch, only 3 levels left. What's our next one? Fuck. Yeah, the suicide mission, or the final level of Mass Effect 2, is without a doubt the most famous singular portion in the series. Effectively, the entire game is spent building up to it, with immense pressure being put on the player to make the right choices and ensure safe passage through it. Basically, the player as Commander Shepard and their self-curated squad of friends and colleagues have to battle through the home turf of the Collectors, the game's main antagonist alongside the Reapers. The choices that the player has made up to this point matter immensely, with spending time with your squad mates and building up loyalty with them throughout the game being just as important as assigning them to the right tasks within the final mission. One misstep, one wrong move, or even a simple momentary lapse in judgment can result in the permanent death of squad mates, which will carry over into the next game. It's been described as being able to play a version of Empire Strikes Back where Han, Leia, and Chewie die that still leads into Jedi. The Herculean task of making sure everyone survives, along with the likability, long-standing relationships, and charisma of your squad mates, makes the suicide mission one of the most difficult and harrowing sections of any game. Because of this, the suicide mission has been appropriately lauded and mythologized by the gaming press. It's been described as a refreshingly brutal mission, in a medium otherwise dominated by happy endings, and a unique example of a truly positive outcome being only earnable through meticulous and extraordinary effort. It's also been praised for the labyrinthian complexity of its choices, and the immense stakes and pressure on the player to make the right ones. You've spent hours of gameplay building up close-knit relationships with this found family of squad mates, and in the span of one wrong decision, they can be permanently killed. This is the kind of non-linear storytelling and dread that video games can excel at, and the type of thing that can't truly exist in any other form of media. While it may not truly be a suicide mission if you know what you're doing, one wrong choice can have a lasting impact. Okay, only 2 levels left, and one of them is our only other bad one. This is the Water Temple from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, an infamously tedious and cumbersome exercise in frustration that some have cited as the singular thing that keeps Ocarina from being the best game of all time. In essence, the player is navigating a largely non-linear dungeon filled with water, with them needing to use the heavy iron boots and a water raising and lowering mechanism to navigate the dungeon. This is complicated by the dungeon's labyrinthian design, the slow and clunky way you have to go into the pause menu constantly to equip and unequip the iron boots, the game's generally unresponsive and clunky underwater controls, and the all-around confusing complexity of the water raising and lowering mechanics. The Water Temple is very often reviled by critics and fans alike, being viewed as a low point and the single standout negative of Ocarina of Time. It's been called the shining example of a bad water level, and criticisms are commonly levied at its layout, repetitive visuals, and the game's overall very unpleasant underwater gameplay. Series creator and designer of the Water Temple, Eiji Aonuma, has openly admitted that he regrets the Water Temple and has apologized for its design. His desire to fix it was cited as one of the main reasons for the game's 3DS remake being developed, and known troll Shigeru Miyamoto has even publicly made fun of him for it. The fucked up part is that it was all inspired by Aonuma's love of diving. The guy just wanted to show us how cool the underwater is, but maybe he should have held off for another generation or two. All in all, while I don't personally think the Water Temple ruins Ocarina, it is most certainly the definitive low point of the game. And lastly, and fittingly, we have the one that started it all, World 1-1 from Super Mario Bros. This is one of the first ever true 2D platforming levels ever developed or played by most people, and is widely perceived as the most famous, recognizable, inspirational, and often parodied or referenced level in video game history. I shouldn't really need to tell you what makes 1-1 so iconic. It's a brilliant and elegantly designed level that so cleanly introduces the player to the game and its mechanics while not overwhelming them with information. Pretty much every level in the Mario series is built upon it in some way, and everyone who's ever developed a video game since 1985 owes at least some dues to this level for setting the precedent for what video game design is. Everything we've discussed in this video, from derelict hellholes like Ravenholm to evocative simulators like All Gillied Up, owe something to Mario's 1-1, for either directly inspiring mechanics or inspiring people who inspired people who inspired people. It's the granddaddy of video game level design, and a clear choice to be chronicled on the largest online encyclopedia available. There we have it, that's the video. If I had any closing thoughts for this experiment, it'd be that I really appreciate the variety in this list on Wikipedia. It'd be easy to think that it would just be things like first levels of retro games, Nintendo levels, surface level iconic levels, but this list really does cover such a wide variety of bases for such a wide variety of reasons that it really is something special. Levels like Liberty Island or Shalebridge Cradle don't immediately come to mind as the most recognizable or famous levels in games, but they're still important and noteworthy enough to people to be immortalized in such a cool way. And things like Green Hill Zone, 1-1, or even Ravenholm are some of the most standout and memorable moments of the games they appear in, so they make just as much sense for entirely different reasons. I think this list is so cool, and does such a great job of showcasing how many different bases are covered by video games. It all deserves to be remembered. Either way, thanks, hope y'all have a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Let me know if you'd like to see a follow-up to this video, and cheers.